In the early 20th century, railways were the main means of transportation for people, especially in rural areas. A train was not just a mode of transport, but also a symbol of progress and hope. However, one story that occurred in the 1920s on the outskirts of a small American town showed that not all trains bring something good. On an old railway line running through dense forests, there was one particular train known to the locals as the Noon Express. This train followed its route every day precisely at noon, and strangely enough, it was never late. Its passengers were mostly workers and traders heading to the market in a nearby town. However, one day in late summer became a day of tragedy, which later spawned a dark legend. The train, as usual, left at noon, but halfway through its journey, it suddenly derailed and plunged into a deep ravine hidden by thick trees. Everyone on board died instantly. The exact cause of the accident was never determined, but the locals were convinced that something supernatural was involved. Soon after the catastrophe, rumors began to spread that every August 25th, precisely at noon, the very same train could be seen again, tragically carrying its doomed passengers. It was said that if anyone happened to be near the tracks at that time, they would hear the train's whistle, the screech of brakes, and the screams of passengers, as if their souls were still unable to find peace. One of those who encountered this phenomenon was a young engineer named James Wilson. He was working on a new line laid near the old railway. On August 25th, he was on duty when he suddenly noticed the old train approaching his locomotive from the other side. Seeing this train, he was shocked, as that railway line had long been abandoned. The train was approaching at incredible speed, but when James looked at his watch, he saw that the time was exactly noon. In horror, he watched as the train sped past him and vanished into the air. In the cab of his train, he felt an icy chill, and his ears echoed with the distant sounds of screams and groans. After this incident, James never took control of a locomotive again. He retired but could never forget that terrifying moment. The locals often told this story to each other, warning new engineers not to approach the old railway line on that fateful day. Railway companies even officially rescheduled train routes to other hours so that no one would cross paths with the Ghost Express. After James Wilson encountered the ghost train, other engineers and locals began to share their own terrifying stories. These accounts added even more mystery and horror to the legend of the Noon Express. One such witness was Edward Marshall, an old engineer who had worked on the railway for over 30 years. In the 1950s, he often worked on the line near the site of the Noon Express crash. Unlike his colleagues, Edward was a practical man who was skeptical of ghost stories. But one night, everything changed. It happened on the night of August 25th. Edward, returning home after his shift, decided to take a shortcut through the old railway. Suddenly, he heard the sound of an approaching train behind him. At first, he thought it was one of the regular trains, but when he turned around, he saw an old steam locomotive surrounded by thick fog. The train was heading straight for him, and Edward, overcome with panic, hurried to step off the tracks. But as the train passed by, he felt an icy chill envelop him, and the air filled with the smell of burning wood and coal. In the windows of the carriages, Edward saw people, but their faces were pale and lifeless, as if they were not alive. For a brief moment, his eyes met those of a woman who was silently screaming for help. When the train disappeared, Edward was left standing, trembling with fear. Later, he recounted that in that moment, he felt as if time had stopped, and he had witnessed a scene from the past, the very disaster that had occurred many years ago. After that incident, Edward never walked on the old railway again and advised others to avoid the place. Another well-known case involved a railroad signalman named Harold Reeves. In 1962, Harold was working on a new section of track located near the old route of the Noon Express. His duties included monitoring signals on various parts of the track, especially at night. One night, on August 25th, while on duty, his attention was drawn to a flashing signal on the old line. The signals were supposed to be off since the line had long been abandoned, but Harold decided to check out what was happening. He approached the old signal booth and saw that the signal continued to flash, as if warning of an approaching train. As he got closer, he heard the sound of a steam engine approaching from the direction of the forest. Puzzled and slightly frightened, Harold stepped onto the tracks and waited. Soon, out of the fog, emerged the very ghost train. But instead of simply passing by as in previous cases, the train stopped right in front of him. A conductor dressed in old-fashioned early 20th century uniform stepped out of the train. He slowly walked up to Harold and, with a smile, handed him a ticket. Harold, completely paralyzed with fear, took the ticket, which looked like a yellowed scrap of paper with barely discernible writing. The conductor silently turned around and returned to the train. As soon as he disappeared behind the carriage doors, the train began to move and once again vanished into thin air. Harold was left standing on the tracks, trembling and holding the old ticket in his hands. The ticket read Noon Express, August 25th, 1921. The next day, he showed the ticket to his superiors, but no one could explain how or why it ended up in Harold's hands. After that, Harold refused to work on that line and soon left town. Stories like these are not uncommon in the world of railways. In different corners of the planet, there are tales of ghost trains that appear on abandoned lines, carrying the memory of long-past disasters. Some paranormal researchers believe that railways may serve as a kind of bridge between worlds, where the past and present sometimes intersect, creating such phenomena.